A crack squad of toad killers has a bold plan to stop the amphibious a-holes from reaching the precious pilbara.
Somewhere at the edge of a shrinking waterhole in northern Australia, a researcher is standing completely still. In front of them, thousands of baby toads are crawling out of the water for the very first time, the newest generation of the worst invasion this continent has ever seen. And something is already waiting for them on the bank.
A lot has been tried over the years to kill off the cane toad, but nothing much has succeeded. But now a native ant may hold out some new hope.
It isn't a net, it isn't poison, and it isn't human. What that researcher is watching in that moment will do more to stop these toads than 90 years of bounties, traps, and science ever managed. And to understand how, you have to go back to the day Australia made the whole thing so much worse. A solution that became the problem. So, let me take you back to the early 1900s, because this whole disaster starts with something that has nothing to do with toads. It starts with sugar. Back then, sugarcane wasn't just a crop in Queensland. It was the economic backbone of the entire region, responsible for more than 20% of its agricultural value. And it was under attack. The greyback cane beetle had moved in, and its larvae were feeding underground, chewing through sugarcane roots and slashing yields by 30 to 40% in some districts. Farmers were panicking, officials were scrambling, and when people are that desperate, they stop asking the hard questions. Here's the part that should have set off every alarm bell in the country. Word had drifted in from Puerto Rico that a big toad could wipe out insect pests in the cane fields. That was it. No controlled trials. Nobody checking what the toad actually ate. No long-term study of what it might do to everything else. Just a rumor and a lot of hope. And when your entire regional economy is on the line, hope has a way of looking a lot like a plan. So in 1935, roughly 102 cane toads were shipped in from Hawaii and set loose near Gordonvale, Queensland. Nobody signed off on a monster that day. They thought they were signing off on a favor. Sit with that number for a second. 102. Every single cane toad in Australia today, all of them, descends from that one tiny founding group. And here's the cruelest joke in the whole story. The beetle they brought the toads in to kill spends much of its life underground, and it can fly. The toad is a clumsy thing that barely climbs and can't jump any real distance. So the one pest it was imported to eat was almost entirely out of reach. The toads just shrugged, ate whatever was slower and closer to the ground, and got to work doing the only thing they were ever really good at, breeding. Nobody believed a few dozen amphibians could ever matter. 70 years later, they'd overrun 1.3 million square kilometers. By 2026, Australia is looking at an estimated 200 million cane toads, nearly 8 times the human population of the entire country, and roughly 20 times more numerous than every koala left alive. But here's the part nobody saw coming. The thing that made them truly unstoppable was never really about how many of them there were. It was about what every single one of them was carrying inside its skin. Poison in every cell. Behind a cane toad's head sit 2 big parotid glands, and they're loaded with bufotoxin, a lethal cocktail of cardiac toxins, neurotoxins, and compounds that go straight for the blood vessels. I want you to really understand how fast this works. A dog can die within an hour of simply licking one, and a cane toad that's only 15 to 20 centimeters long carries enough poison to kill a freshwater crocodile. And that's not a scare story. It's been documented over and over again across the Northern Territory. Now, here's what makes it so much worse. The poison isn't just in the adults. It's there at every single stage of the toad's life. The eggs, the tadpoles, the juveniles, all of it. So a fish eats the eggs and dies. A native frog swallows the tadpoles and dies. A monitor lizard or a snake grabs an adult and dies. Even a brown snake, one of the deadliest animals on the planet, can collapse within 2 to 30 minutes of biting one. And the numbers on the ground are brutal. In some regions, freshwater crocodile populations crashed by more than 70% within just a few seasons of the toads showing up. Monitor lizards got hit even harder, down by as much as 90%. Think about what that actually means. This wasn't a predator hunting prey. It was a slow-motion poisoning of an entire food web, working its way from the top down. Because the bigger and hungrier a predator was, the more likely it was to grab a fat, easy-looking toad, and the more likely it was to die for it. The invasion killed the strongest hunters first. So, If you're sitting there thinking a poison that can drop a crocodile from a single bite is about as bad as this gets, do me a favor and hit subscribe right now, because you genuinely haven't seen the worst of it yet. The poison isn't even the scary part. The scary part is the math. How many of these things Australia is actually up against? And that is exactly where we're going next. The math of an unstoppable species. Here's the number that keeps ecologists up at night. A single female cane toad lays 20,000 to 30,000 eggs in one breeding event, and she can do that twice a year. Multiply that across the population, and you're looking at billions of toxic eggs pouring into Australian waterways every single year. This isn't a species you can outcatch. It's a species you'd have to outbreed, and nothing native even comes close. The bill for all of this is staggering. Australia's National Science Agency estimates the ecological and indirect economic damage has now blown past $2 billion, and the pressure reaches way beyond conservation, into tourism, into agriculture, even into mining, an industry worth roughly $136 billion. But money isn't the part that stunned researchers. This is. The Australian cane toads have become more dangerous than the ancestors they came from. A 2015 study found their poison glands are bigger, with toxin concentrations 40 to 50% higher than the South American populations they descend from. And they're not just getting more toxic, they're evolving in fast forward. Between 2018 and 2022, study after study showed these toads evolving 5 to 10 times faster than ordinary wildlife. Their legs grew about 6% longer, their muscles got stronger, even their stress hormones dropped. And you can watch it in how fast they spread. In the 1940s, cane toads crept forward 5 to 10 kilometers a year. By the 2010s, that had exploded to 40 to 60 kilometers a year, with record individuals pushing 76, the fastest territorial expansion ever recorded in any amphibian on Earth. And here's why that should genuinely unsettle you. The toads at the very front of the invasion are the longest-legged, the fastest, the most stress-proof of the entire population, because those are the ones that get there first and breed with each other. Every year the frontier moves, it's being pushed by a slightly better version of the animal than the year before. Australia wasn't fighting a toad. It was fighting a toad that got better at invading with every generation. So, Australia did the only thing it could think to do. It declared all-out war. And for the better part of a century, it lost. When every human weapon failed. For decades, the plan was basically muscle, hand collection, trapping, organized night hunts with buckets and headlamps, whole communities pulling toads out of the landscape by the millions year after year. And you know what all that effort did to the overall population? Almost nothing. When you're facing 200 million animals that each lay tens of thousands of eggs, hauling out a few million is like trying to bail out the ocean with a teaspoon. The biology is what made it hopeless. A cane toad tadpole can only turn into a land animal once its body produces enough thyroid hormone. Think of it as a switch that flips leg growth on, dissolves the tail, and sends it up onto dry ground, which means that by the time you're chasing an adult, you've already lost. It's bred, it's spread, it's long gone from the water. Standing over that exact problem was Professor Rick Shine, a man who had studied these animals long enough to finally see the thing everyone else kept missing. And you can imagine the frustration of it, pouring years into a fight where every win on paper meant nothing in the water. The adults were never the target. They never had been. Watching yet another haul of captured toads change absolutely nothing, he and his team flipped the entire logic of the fight. If you can't beat the adults, you stop aiming at the adults. You go after the tadpoles instead, because the tadpoles are concentrated in the water, physically fragile, and, strangely, already cannibals. They'll happily eat the eggs of their own kind. That single shift in thinking cracked the whole problem wide open. But while Shine's team was back in the lab trying to engineer a weapon out of that idea, something out in the wild had already been quietly doing the job for years, for free. And almost nobody had thought to stop and watch it closely, until, finally, someone did. The ants that changed everything. The breakthrough didn't come out of a chemistry set or a research budget. It came from a person crouched at the edge of the water, watching the exact moment baby toads leave it, and noticing who was already there waiting for them. Meat ants, just ordinary aggressive native Australian ants that have been on this continent for millions of years. And here's what the researchers realized. These ants hammer cane toads at the single most vulnerable moment of their entire lives. When toadlets first crawl out of the water, they're tiny, slow, and thin-skinned, barely functional. And unlike native frogs, which slip out under the cover of night, young cane toads leave the water in broad daylight, which happens to be exactly when meat ants are out hunting. So, the toads walk straight into the ambush every single time. And then came the number that stopped scientists cold. Out in the field, in some regions, up to 90% of newly emerged toads were dying in their first few days of life. Not from poison, not from traps, not from a single human hand, but simply because the ants found them and took them apart. Now, picture the person standing at that waterline the first time it truly registered. No net in hand, no sample jar. Just watching the mud move, watching wave after wave of the continent's most feared invader crawl out and get dragged down before they'd taken 20 steps. You spend your whole career fighting something with helicopters and chemicals and government funding. And then, you glance down at your own boots and realize the ground itself had been doing the job all along, for free, for as long as anyone had bothered to look. But here's the reversal. And this is the strangest, most important part of the whole story. The cane toad's poison, the weapon that let it kill crocodiles, that emptied out entire food webs, that made it untouchable everywhere it went, is completely useless here. A meat ant doesn't swallow a toadlet whole and drop dead. A colony just swarms it. And at that fresh, newly emerged stage, the toadlet's toxin is far too weak and too undeveloped to save it. Read that again. The invader's single greatest advantage, the thing that made it unstoppable across an entire continent, means absolutely nothing against the one predator killing 9 out of every 10 of its young. And it gets better. This natural weapon turned out to be shockingly clean. Native frogs are barely touched because their toadlets and their timing are different. So the ants aren't wiping out the very wildlife everyone is fighting to save. After decades of blunt tools that hurt as much as they helped, Australia had stumbled onto something that seemed to target the invader almost on purpose. The catch is that the ants can't be everywhere. They wipe out staggering numbers of young toads, but they don't reach every breeding site, and they certainly can't chase down the adults already pushing across the north. So the plan shifted from just watching the ants to actually working with them, finding ways to draw ant activity toward the water's edge, that narrow strip every young toad is forced to cross. But Australia had learned one lesson in blood back in 1935. You never bet everything on a single species again. So, instead of leaning on the ants alone, they started building an entire arsenal around them. Building layers of pressure. The most futuristic weapon in that arsenal goes straight for the tadpoles, the exact target Rick Shine had pointed everyone toward. Using CRISPR-Cas 9 gene editing, researchers switched off the gene that produces thyroid hormone, the switch that lets a tadpole become a toad. Every embryo, just 4 to 8 hours old, had to be injected by hand. They hit success rates of 60 to 70%, though scaling it up is still brutally hard. What they created had never existed before. They nicknamed them Peter Pan tadpoles, after the boy who never grew up. They're bigger, stronger swimmers that never metamorphose, never leave the water, and never reproduce. Instead, they live 4 to 5 times longer than a normal tadpole, and they spend that entire extended life doing one thing: eating cane toad eggs, then dying without leaving behind a single descendant. As of early 2026, every trial is still locked inside enclosed ponds and artificial reservoirs in Western Australia and the Northern Territory. And that caution is the whole point. This time, Australia is moving slowly on purpose, because it remembers exactly what happened the last time it rushed. Then there's a trick that turns the toad's own chemistry against it. Pheromone traps mimic the chemical signals given off by cane toad eggs, luring the tadpoles straight in. In one test, a single small pond pulled in and captured more than 40,000 tadpoles in under a week, all of them gone before a single one ever reached dry land. There's a layer for the predators too, those freshwater crocodiles that kept dying. They're being taught to leave the toads alone. After tasting a specially designed bait that makes them feel sick, the crocodiles learn their lesson and start avoiding the real thing, dropping their death rate down to almost 0, and finally giving a battered population room to breathe. And then there's the landscape itself. Projects like the Dry Shield change where farm animals get their water, exploiting one simple weakness. A cane toad can't survive when the water dries up. In trials, toads cut off from water managed to crawl just 3.3 meters over 5 days before they died. With $18 million behind it, the plan is to seal off the next wave of spread before the 2027 to 2028 wet season. None of these on its own is anywhere near enough to win, and that turns out to be the entire point. Patience over panic. Not the ants, not the gene editing, not the traps, not the crocodiles, not the dry corridors. No single one of them wins this war, but stack them all on top of each other. Pressure at every stage of the toad's life, in every corner of the landscape, and suddenly the toads are facing something they have never faced before. And that word, stack, is really the whole lesson here. Because think about how this started. Nearly a century ago, Australia reached for one fast, dramatic fix to a farming problem, and it has been paying for that impatience ever since. Those 102 toads became a warning, written across an entire continent. Proof that the quickest solution and the worst mistake are so often the very same decision, just seen from opposite ends of time. And now, staring down another set of choices it can't take back, the country is doing the exact opposite. Patience instead of panic, study instead of speed. And in the strangest twist of all, it's trusting a colony of native ants to quietly finish a war that all of its technology couldn't. There's something almost poetic in that. This whole crisis began because people assumed one imported animal could fix everything by itself. And the way out seems to be the opposite truth entirely, that nothing wins alone. The ants don't need funding, or permits, or a wet season. They just need to be in the right place at the right moment when the toads are at their very weakest. After 90 years of being outmatched, Australia may have finally found the ally that had been fighting this war all along. Unpaid, unnoticed, right there in the dirt. So, which of these methods do you think is the best way to stop the invasion of the cane toads? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. It's the best way to support the channel and keep deep dives like this one coming.